Let's begin with the first question and answer session. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. Therefore, we ask that only one question be asked per phone call and that these questions be as brief as possible. You may call the studio directly at the phone numbers or fax which appear on your screen, including the ITC iPhone number 688-1700. We remind you to make your phone calls at a distance from the monitor to avoid feedback. Our first question comes from Zacatecas, and it relates to since increased risk and security challenges are new global realities and public resources are increasingly more scarce, should organizations and communities focus more on self-protection and policing strategies and efforts rather than on increasing risk management and public security and bureaucracy?
Well, the first thing to remember is that all crises and disasters are local. And if we wait for the parent company or the federal government or other countries to respond to an immediate crisis, we're going to be very disappointed. So local government, companies, and individuals should do their best to prepare by doing their best to prevent disasters and by figuring out the optimal response, including communication. One of the things we're going to talk about is emergency communication centers. So communication is consistent and centralized.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Hidalgo, Mexico. Go ahead, please.
Bueno, gracias. Nos da mucho gusto saludar a todos.
We're very pleased to say hi to everybody participating in the video conference. We're calling from the state of Hidalgo in Mexico. And our question is the following. We have information that this state of emotional intelligence can really improve the communication in terms of disasters. However, how can educational institutions, specifically universities, how can we educate emotionally intelligent students when this academic load is just, well, it's an overload? How can we do this?
Well, that's a huge topic, and Peter Salovey and Daniel Goldman and many of us spend a lot of time talking about and thinking about and writing about emotional intelligence. The first thing we should do is recognize that in the short term we can control our emotions, that very often anger or fear or panic are counterproductive and not a good emotion. But eventually, you have to be able to express your emotions to a friend, to a counselor, to a relative, because pent-up emotions are very unhealthy. The third thing about emotional intelligence that is very important to teach our children, our students, and our relatives is that emotions are data. They're not unlike financial data or health data. If we're feeling envy, jealousy, pride, anger, sadness, there's probably a reason for that. And we ought to figure out what the reason is and figure out how we should respond intelligently to that emotional input.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your questions. No, we go down. I'm sorry. Next question. We have a question from Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. Go ahead, please.
Buenos días.
In the framework of a global society and in our new global society and all these changes and all the different facets that we see in different countries, how can we achieve balance and communication among people? How can we achieve this?
Well, it is very difficult because economic disparities exist. There is a digital divide that separates the information rich in every country and around the world from the information poor. It is important for all institutions to think very, very carefully in this day and age about imbalances around the world, imbalances that causes waves of immigrants or drugs or economic disparities. We live in a world that is so connected today that a problem in one country can quickly become another country's problem. So efforts at normalization, globalization, and international cooperation are more imperative than ever today.
Great. Our next question is faxed in from Ecuador, so I will read that for you. Kidnapping is a particularly strong fear-producing tactic in a community.
Yes.
Do you believe stronger legal and social penalties should be imposed on those who engage in such activity?
Well, in most countries, the penalties are already very extreme for kidnapping. It's a crime that's treated much like murder is treated in many countries around the world. So clearly, deterrence helps. Of course, there is a new phenomenon in the world, and that is that people that don't care much about their own life, that are willing to give their life to fly planes into buildings or to blow themselves up on buses in countries around the world. For these individuals, of course, there's no deterrent. So preparedness is also very important. It's also extremely important not to exist in a chronic state of fear. Remember, the main product of terrorism is terror. If you live in constant fear of being kidnapped or blown up or afraid to fly, that, in a sense, is more harmful than the remote possibility that one of these things are going to happen to you.
Thank you for your questions. And now let's move to the second module of our program.